I'm sorry, but there are Sundays where I come to church and I should not leave feeling comfortable.
Hey friends, welcome to the Determined Truth Podcast, where we equip the church to be the church.
Well, hey everyone, we are back in the book of James. We're doing our second and I'm going to say final episode. We've been trying to get through these in shorter times. We'll see. It might not be. Anyway, for scheduling, it might have to be because you have some stuff coming up and we have a guest for First Peter, and then you're going to be gone for a couple weeks. Do you want to tell people about that real quick, and we could dive into it more? Actually, technically, we've already talked about this in a previous episode, but we're going to remind people again. So,
as people are listening, I'm actually gone now.
Yes,
that's what's weird. So here's what we're going to do. Okay, ready?
Just like that.
Guys, it's wrong. Okay. No. I'm heading to. I think I mentioned this to you personally, Vinny, and a couple other people. I always say I'm heading to Jerusalem. It's the easiest way to say it, because this issue is so politicized. If I say something else, it sounds like, what? You're pro-Palestinian, or anti-Israel, you're pro-Israel. Like, seriously, people. My goal is to head, I'm going to spend a week in Bethlehem. I'll spend a couple days flying to Amman, Jordan, spend a couple days in Amman, Jordan with some friends and some colleagues and meeting some Palestinian Christians in Amman. And then I'll travel over through, the border crossing, and that'll take a full day probably to get to Jerusalem. I'll spend the night in Jerusalem, and then I'll spend a week in Bethlehem. Basically, the goal is to meet and hang out with Palestinian Christians and Palestinian friends and colleagues. For one, to show them solidarity and just to say, hey, listen, we've got your back. We're here. Tourism and people coming from the West and other parts of the world is the number one source of income from them, and they don't have any of that right now. So anything that you can bring into the land and just your presence alone, say, hey, we haven't forgotten you. So just to show solidarity. And then secondly, just to see for myself what's going on. I haven't been there for about 8 or so 9 years now. And I know things are significant. I think like 100 times worse than it was the last time I was there. And you try to report on these things and people they don't believe the stories. So I'm like, if I can see for myself what's going on. So I'm not going into Israel because, again, my goal is just to be with the Palestinian Christians and hear their stories. Obviously, I'm advocating for peace and justice for all sides. As we always say, peace for one party that's not a just peace for the other party is not actually a lasting peace. So to bring Palestinians peace and justice, it means you have to bring Israelis peace and justice. And to bring peace and justice to Israel means you have to bring peace and justice to Palestine. That's the whole point. That's why there's such a conflict there. But anyways, then I'll spend on the way out, I'll spend maybe a couple days in Jerusalem, which for me is just kind of a spiritual retreat for me. I haven't had some time off. I haven't had much time off in the last couple of years. So it'll be just a couple days just to go, okay, I'm just going to sit in Jerusalem and I don't have any plans. I'm just going to walk around. I love going to the Mount of Olives. I love doing things like that. Walk around the old city. And then go back to Amman, Jordan and fly home. So it'll be a full 2 weeks of travel, which is more than I usually travel for. So yeah, I appreciate your prayers and support. And if you want to support our trip, obviously the idea is to go there with some money and to go there with some, hand out money, not to hand out money, but using their services and I'm staying in homes, and I'll provide them with some resources for caring for me and things like that as well. I'll meet with Munther Isaac, in Ramallah. I'm going to go over to Ramallah one day and meet with Munther. And, yep. But yeah, if you want to pray for us, that'd be great. And my concern for travel, by the way, is my flight out there, I head through Dallas in the evening and I have a 1 hour layover. So I know I have to go from one terminal to the other terminal, which is a train in Dallas, because obviously it's an international flight. And if there's any thunderstorms, I'm not going to make that flight. So, but otherwise we're looking forward to it. And if you want to support the trip, certainly send money to Determined Truth. And Rob, you can send a note with it if you want as well. But that'd be great. And the money will go to the Palestinians, essentially. So
okay, and we'll have that up. We have the support link on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube. If you are listening to the podcast on the audio app, that will be in the show notes. Also, if this issue, if it's still somewhat new to you and you're, if you're still hearing this Rob talk and you're saying, okay, what do you mean Palestinian Christians? That's an oxymoron of a word. This is something where you could check out Rob's book, Land of Contention, that he wrote.
I was just going to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Was it a year ago or 2 years ago? Whenever it came out, maybe the fall.
The book came out a year and a half ago in November of 2024. Yep.
Yeah.
And the audio book, of course, is available.
Yeah, very, very, print form or audiobook form. It's not a long read, so it's a good
93 pages
introduction.
in print, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
cool.
That's right. And we obviously have a lot of podcasts, a lot of blogs. We have all kinds of live streams on the YouTube channel. We have a YouTube live stream series of 6 episodes of Introduction to the Israel-Palestinian Conflict. And then we have plenty of other resources as well. And please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to have if you're listening to this as well, obviously if you're listening to this or watching, the plan is when I come back, within the first week or two after I come back, this will be the second week of August, I'm going to have a Zoom meeting on a Monday night for anyone that wants to hear about the trip and ask questions or whatever. It'll just be Zoom, so you can ask questions, we can talk and interact. And so if you send me an email at rob@determinedtruth.com, I'll see if I have that banner, Vinny. There you go. Rob@determinedtruth.com and say, hey, I want to be a part of that Zoom meeting. We can send you that link. So
very good. Very good. Well, today we are in James, a man who also lived in Jerusalem for a while. And we started giving the background and started looking at some stuff last week. We're going to pick that up and still look at more of some of the bigger picture issues that are happening there. One thing we mentioned it, but we didn't really go into it last week, is the background of the letter and what's happening with these 12 tribes in dispersion. As a Revelation scholar, obviously you deal with the 12 tribes of Israel in the book of Revelation. We see that in chapter 7. And when we did that series a couple of years ago, we talked about that. But why is James discussing this when these 12 tribes, the 12 tribes, they're not in existence anymore? What is he referring to?
Yeah, so we discussed the authorship last week. I'm pretty sure we did, right? Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And in this instance, the authorship makes a little bit of importance. It's important to know the background. If this is James, the brother of Jesus, the apostle in Jerusalem, the head of the Jerusalem church we mentioned last week, this would be a letter from him. It would be authoritative. So he's writing to the Jewish Christ followers who are dispersed abroad. Chapter 1, verse 1, to the 12 tribes who are dispersed abroad. And very likely what he means by that, it just simply depends on what your view of Christian Zionism ultimately is at the end of the day. Oh, these are the Jewish Christians only. The reality is, the letter's written to the larger Christian community, but it's focused and centered on the Jewish Christians in particular. There's no question about that. And we discussed last week the heavy influence of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. But he can't be referring to Israel as the 12 tribes. Mm-hmm. He's addressing the church. He's addressing, and again, I'm using the word church here. Obviously, it's anachronistic in a sense, but he's addressing the Christians, the Christ followers, maybe the Jewish group among them, and he's describing them as the 12 tribes. Well, the reality is the only, quote, ethnically Jewish people alive at this time are from the 2 tribes of the south, Judah and Simeon. There are no members of the 10 northern tribes. I mean, there's Anna, of course.
And Benjamin?
What did I say? Yeah. I said, it is Benjamin. Thank you. Judah and Benjamin. All right. And the other 10 tribes of the north are gone. There's Anna, however you say her name, in Luke chapter 2, who's from the tribe of Asher. We don't know what to make of that because the 10 northern tribes are simply gone. They don't exist any longer. So the first thing is, if he is referring to ethnic Israelites only, that's great. But he's addressing members of the southern tribes as though they constitute the 12 tribes. And when I think really quickly it's happening here, of course, this is the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel 37, the 2 sticks, the dead bones, these are coming to life. And what's happening is the 12 tribes have been made into one. And the New Testament is describing the renewal of God's people, the covenant of God's people, what we call the church, as the restoration of Israel, meaning the restoration of the northern and southern tribes. So this is a term. Did that make sense to you, Vinny? I explained that well enough? This is referring to the Jewish followers of Christ as though they constitute the 12 tribes. And the answer is they only are ethnically members of the southern 2. Therefore, he has to view the church or the God's people, even though he's only addressing ethnic Israelites, or ethnic Jews, as though they constitute the whole of the fulfillment. I think that's what you see here. So, yeah.
And this is not uncommon in the Bible to see something indicative of another different types of groups. So, for instance, throughout the Old Testament, you see Egypt being mentioned, but it might not. It's not necessarily specifically mentioning the time of Pharaoh, but Egypt is kind of like a prototype of an evil ruler. Babylon is the same way. Where Babylon is, and so like those are like the two Old Testament cities that are representative of a larger archetype of an evil empire. And so it's the same type of thing here. This is just a way of identifying the representatives of the people of God. But what's interesting,
we'll see that in the next book, by the way. Sorry to cut you off, but in the next book that we do is First Peter. He addresses them as the chosen ones, and then he says, "She who is in Babylon sends her greetings." So he's writing from Babylon. So he's using this typological language to describe the people of God. So sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. Well, and this is even
that'll be the last time I interrupt you.
For the next 3 seconds.
All right, I'll stop.
But in the book of Hebrews, when we did that study, we'd spent a little bit of time talking about classical dispensationalism. I don't think we use the term classical dispensationalism, but it is broken it up into a few areas. And we talked about Scofield and his influence with the Scofield Study Bible. And under classical dispensationalism, and you still even see this today in pockets that hold to that kind of view, because that theology has evolved over the years. But there's many Christians who hold to that schema, who would even say, okay, the book of First Peter and the book of James are not for Gentile Christians. We shouldn't read that book. Basically, they would have a view that we should only read Paul. And so the Sermon on the Mount is only for Jews. Obviously, James is only for Jews because it's written to the 12 tribes. Peter makes similar language in First Peter. And so they would split it up and say, okay, this is even for us to read. And so the moral ethics and the rules don't apply to us here. We just read Paul. And that's kind of an extreme hyper view that most people don't hold to, but that has become part of the way many people slice up the Bible and read the Bible. And they would even say, oh yeah, James doesn't even apply to us because it's only written to them.
Yeah, and I addressed some of this, basically the framework for this in the book Land of Contention that you put up. It's this idea of the fulfillment of God's promises, covenant promises have come in Christ and through Christ, and they've expanded to include the Gentiles of the nations. I think that's just very easy to figure out in the New Testament. And First Peter's going to make it clear as well. So, yep.
Yeah. So with James, then, just to kind of wrap up that conversation, he's not talking about 10 specific tribes. This isn't a literal letter that's going out. This is just indicative of all God's people, Jew or Gentile.
Yeah, he's specifically addressing most likely the Jewish members of these covenant communities scattered throughout, but not a problem at all that it applies to the Gentiles as well, because First Peter does that. So,
and it's not because he's specifically going out to search for them. It's probably just because those are the people who are in his immediate sphere of influence or his own missionary field. That's probably why
he's the authoritative leader of them. I think that's pretty clear throughout the New Testament that he's the authoritative leader of them as the head of the church in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and we talked about
head of the
last
covenant
week.
community in Jerusalem.
We brought in like something like in Acts 15, and you see he is clearly giving the final say when they have this council, and Peter speaks. Who he's there, he's part of that leadership group, but who gives the final message is James. He's the one. And
James kind of does the opening of the ceremonies as well in Acts 15. That's and if we were to add to that the fact that James cites Amos 9, and Amos 9 is about the restoration of the Gentiles coming into the fold, so he's citing Amos 9 like, okay, this is what's happening. This is the covenant promises of God have been expanded to include the Gentiles. This is what was promised all along. This is the essence of the New Testament. When we make these Jew-Gentile distinctions, guess what? We actually aren't reading Paul very well, because there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female. Or Ephesians 2, he made the two into one new family. You who were far off have been brought near. You who were excluded have now been brought into the one commonwealth. I mean, this is the New Testament language. So, and this is, it's Eden language as well, right? The two shall be one flesh. Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed. It's because they were one. They were unified. There's no shame when you're naked and nobody else is around. So, Father, I pray, I'm just going to continue real quick. John 17, Father, I pray that they may be one, even as we are one. This is the essence of the biblical story. The Edenic promises, the covenant promises have happened. So, we expect to see this covenant language applying to ethnic Israel, being applied to all of God's people, which even though here it's only applied to the Jewish people, but you can see the expansion of it. So sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
really. So as we look at the entirety of the letter, what's the purpose behind why James is writing? Because what we've studied we've done so many letters, obviously. Most of the New Testament, the books are letters. Letters are occasional, they're situational. The author is writing for a reason. So why is James writing this? What's happening? It's not just his memoirs or his life experience that he's passing on.
Yeah, well, he says so this is really important. So verse 2, the very famous verse in the book of James, consider it all joy, my brothers, or my brothers and sisters, when you encounter trials, or trials of various kinds, or various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect, or teleos, I think it's teleos over here in the Greek. Teleon, right there. All right. That you may be perfect or complete, lacking in nothing. Okay. So what's really significant here is there's something going on. They're suffering some kind of trials. They're suffering some kind of tribulations that they have to endure. And they're probably not enduring very well, because James goes on to say, look, guys, you can't do what you're doing here. And what they're doing, of course, is I'll go ahead and kind of cut to the chase here. They're lashing out with their tongue verbally. You're like, well, that's kind of weird. In the ancient culture, and by the way, I just read over the course, I didn't read all of it, but over the course of the weekend, I was reading through Werner Mischke's book. I remember Werner, we had him on, I think.
He's great.
Yeah, and so Werner lives not far from here, and we get together once in a while. And his book is titled, what's the name of his book? I think I wrote it down because I'm always bad with names and words. There it is. The Global Gospel. And you might enjoy it, actually, Vinny. It's I was able to read kind of skimming. Okay, I get what he's saying here. I can move on, and I get what he's saying. It was well written that I was able to read that way, so I can kind of get a quick read out of it. But it's basically all about honor and shame, and it's a wonderful background material on modern cultures and of our world today, how they are modern honor and shame cultures, and the Western culture is essentially not. It's certainly not the same. So when we translate the gospel and say, it's about guilt, they're actually a culture that's more concerned with shame than with guilt. And his argument is Jesus comes to take away our shame and our guilt. But he does a great job of saying, hey, look, when you look at this verse and this verse and this verse, understand the ancient context was shame. You've brought shame on the family. And, we talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan, for example. And in that parable, the son says, Father, I wish you were dead. I want my inheritance. Well, that's shame. This man has undermined his father and who he is. The best thing he could do is leave and be gone. And then he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm eating what the pigs eat here. Even my father's hired servants eat better than I do. I'm going to go home. And in the ancient context, they're like, no, don't go home, because you're bringing your shame back. Like, I think in our culture, right, you and I would go, oh, my son's coming back. That's good news. That would not be good news in that culture, because he's bringing his shame with him. And then the father runs out, like, what are you doing, father? Running out to meet him. And the father doesn't run out for anybody. That's shameful. And you don't gird up your loins, because you have to kind of show your legs there. And not only that, but I'm so important that you come to me. I don't run to you. And if I'm late, that's your problem. I'm a man of value, of honor, and importance. So we understand these stories in light of the ancient context of honor and shame. Well, in the ancient context of honor and shame, and I think we've said this before in our podcast, is that the goal at all costs is to gain honor. That's every single moment of every single day. And Werner does a good job of highlighting this. Your goal is to seek and gain honor. Now, if you can't do that because you're poor, you're a day laborer, whatever it might be, you're a servant, then you need to do everything you can to make sure you avoid shame. Okay. So when someone has verbally abused you, this by why, Vinny, might be important for you, and you might already know this. In 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, we have the list of requirements to being a pastor and a leader. Well, they can't be pugnacious. They can't be abusive speech, because what happens in the culture was that's why it's an occasional document, totally relevant to that culture. If someone offends you, if someone shames you, if someone says something about you, right? If this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman that is. That was a way of bringing Jesus down, speaking derogatorily about him and reducing his honor, right? That woman has no honor at all, and Jesus gives her honor by allowing her to anoint his feet. She worships Jesus and gives him honor. He receives that worship from a woman whom it's all about this honor and shame. If you enter a house and you go to sit at a dinner table, know your place, because if someone with more honor comes in, they're going to boot you to the end, and you're going to sit by the door. It's all about this honor and shame. So what happens, and if someone shames you, you have to defend your honor. You have to shame them back. Verbal speech was part of, it was accepted speech. It was part of the culture. It was expected speech. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, you turn the other. No, you slap him back because they shamed you. And the only way you can defend your honor is to shame them back. And by the way, it's not just your honor. It's the honor of your family. It's the honor of your tribe. It's the honor of this has serious implications. You think of these honor cultures where, they call them honor killings, where someone's done this. Yeah. I'm going to go too far in this conversation. I know we have a lot to discuss today, but someone has done something shameful. You kill in response to that. In other words, you defend, or some shame's been done to them. And by the way, Werner did I sent Werner a note on this. I didn't even think about this. He talked about how the rise of Nazism and Hitler was set by the Treaty of Versailles, because the end of the First World War basically shamed Germany and imposed such serious sanctions on them that it put them in abject poverty. So they became shamed. How do you defend your honor? Is you blame somebody else. Warner does a good job saying you do this, you do this, you do this. You could retreat. You could blame somebody else. You could be violent. You do these things when you've been shamed. And Hitler used that to say, it's the Jews' fault. They did this to us. And he rallied this German nationalism to restore their pride. And he also mentioned that the same thing happened with the Arabs after the destruction of the Ottoman Empire. You got an empire 600 years in duration. And the history is that the Western allies, especially Britain and France, went to the Ottomans. If you heard of Lawrence of Arabia, that famous story, they went to Lawrence of Arabia and said, if you can get the Arabs, not all Ottomans were Arabs, right? Arabs is a certain people group. If you can get them to side with us, right, in World War I against the Allied, against whatever the Austrians and things like that, those forces, then and against the Ottomans, because the Ottomans were allied with them, and against then when we win the war, we're going to give you freedom. This was promised to Lawrence of Arabia. Now that was 1914 to 1918. Well, in 1916, what the Arabs did not know about, Sykes-Picot Agreement was signed. French and British agreed that when the war ended, they would divide up the Middle East. So the French get Lebanon, Syria, and the north. The British get the south, Jordan, Palestine, and everything else. That's why the British were in charge of Palestine for such a long time. And that's why the Lebanese, of course, are French. And so what happened was that the Arabs became humiliated by Western, and what happened was that fed this sense of Islamic nationalism, Islamic pride. You have these infidels. They've done this thing to us. They've destroyed the Ottomans, and then they did this to you. And if you look at Osama bin Laden and all the terrorist acts, look at Iran. Iran's national government says that they must defend Palestine. Their constitution says they have to defend Palestine. We look at all Arabs are always been violent. It's like, actually the Arab terrorism and extremism there's a history behind it, but it's primarily the last 100 years. And it's a response. I mentioned Osama bin Laden. He explicitly said, my wife and I watched on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. We were watching this special, 2011. And there was an interview with Osama bin Laden, like 4 years before 2001, right? Before with this, a foreign Osama bin Laden wasn't anybody real big back then. So this international, I think British or American correspondent was embedded with Osama bin Laden. And he asked him, and Osama bin Laden said something bad's going to happen on American soil. And the guy's like, why would you do that? And Osama bin Laden, obviously through a translator, said, because of American foreign policy in the Middle East. Okay. So all this by a segue, and to point out Werner's book, which I think is a good read, is to simply say, if someone shames you, your job is to honor them. So you remember, you're aware in James chapter 3, let me go back to the screen here. with the scriptures here. In James chapter 3, it's like, if you're a teacher, by the way, watch out how you use your tongue. Be careful. The tongue is a small part of the body in verse 5. It makes great boasts. How great a forest is set aflame by such a fire. So what they were doing was they were lashing out with their tongue. They were defending their honor. And what James, to go back to James then, what James is saying is, look, guys, you need to suffer well and suffer righteously. Consider it joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Now, watch this here. I did a quick search on these words here. So, upomone this is the noun form of the verb to endure or whatever. So it's translated here as endurance, and you see it occurs twice. I did a quick search in the New Testament. Notice it occurs 3 times in the book of James. James 1:3, which we see right here. The testing of your faith produces endurance. James 1:4, let endurance have its perfect result. This is the end result. And then it appears in chapter 5. So we'll skip to chapter 5 here. Well, we count those blessed who endured. And that's the noun. Let's see, here we go. This is the noun right here. You've heard of the endurance of Job. So the book begins and it ends. It's framed by this endure, suffer well for the sake of the gospel. Now, if we go back to James chapter 1 for a second here, and feel free to interject if you want. The verbal form also occur. I think I did a search on the verbal form. So here's the verbal form actually, I want to show you one other thing about the book, the noun form. Revelation 1:9. Revelation 1:9. This is the beginning of what I think is the first story in the book of Revelation. Verses 1 through 8 of Revelation is the introduction, and then verse 9 is John's vision on the island of Patmos. Chapter 4 is John's vision in heaven. The 2 main stories. I, your brother and fellow partaker in the tribulation, kingdom, and hupomone, perseverance, which are in Christ Jesus. I was on the island of Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. So the book of Revelation begins with this, I was suffering tribulation for the sake of the kingdom. And that's what the book of James is trying to get us to understand. All right, so now the verbal form of that same word occurs in James chapter 1, verse 12. Okay. So again, this is the verbal form, and it says, blessed is the man who perseveres. A verb's obviously an action word. So makarios, that's the word for the Beatitudes, right? Blessed is. It's always this makarios. So here's this blessing. So James is writing them to encourage them to endure so that they can become perfect or telos or complete. They've attained the status. And he says, if you do this, you're blessed if you persevere under trial. Okay, this leads them to this, verse 18 then. So, verse 8, in the exercise of his will, it's God, brought forth by the word of truth, so that we, and here's that so that, which is a result clause. The result of this, not a purpose, but a result, slight difference between the two. By the word of his truth, so that we would be a first fruit among his creatures. So if I were to say, what's the book of James kind of getting at? It's endure well for the sake of the gospel and the kingdom, without lashing back with the tongue, without being violent, because there's chapter 4 says that there's quarrels among you, and no doubt that there should be. They were responding as their culture tells them to respond. Mm-hmm. And James is saying, and we're going to see this in 1 Peter. This is phenomenal, the beauty of 1 Peter. James is like, no, we can't do that. We can't respond the way our culture responds. Instead, we're to respond with grace and with truth. And let me go back to the scriptures one more time. And he says in verse 22, let me go here. Of chapter 1, he says, prove yourselves doers of the word, not merely hearers who delude themselves. There it is. And so look what he says, my brothers, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. The anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Therefore, put those things aside and be doers of the word. So I think that's a really important thing here, where the understanding this is really significant for the letter itself.
At Determined Truth, we do more than just this podcast. One of our major projects is training pastors in India each week. We even help start a Bible college there. But we could only do this because of the generous support from partners like you. Seriously, that means you. If you consider supporting us with a fully tax-deductible donation with anything from $5 a month or more, we can continue to equip the church to be the church. To give, go to determinedtruth.com and click on the Give tab, or find the link in today's show notes. Thanks.
So it's just interesting to think of it in this way, because I don't know, violence is something that there's part of me that always assumes that violence is just so prevalent in the ancient world because of movies and all that. It's what does C.S. Lewis say? The chronological snobbery of thinking that the present's always better than the past. So you assume,
Right.
oh yeah, everyone's barbarians and whatnot. But then there's also, within Christian communities, we also import a modern understanding of what a church should look like. And while there definitely is a lot of gossip is still something that plagues the Christian church. We probably just do, violent speaking in a different kind of way. Like you said, this is something that's expected. The way you talk about someone.
Yeah.
This is something that it's expected that you would talk negatively about someone in a certain kind of way, even if they are a peer in, like, even here, Jews would talk about Jews in very harsh kind of ways, because that's what you had to do culturally in order to regain your footing and to it's either you're either going to be shamed or I'm going to be shamed. So we have to make it you. It can't be me.
Yeah.
And so this is a major expected part of the community. And once again, this is something that we're seeing in the biblical story, where the biblical story is completely doing an upheaval on cultural norms and saying, yeah, we all accept that this is the way it's supposed to be. It's not like we even do this and feel bad about it. You pursue this sort of thing, but we're actually going to do it differently now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we could spend so much time on this. I'll do my best not to, but James's point is, you're deceiving yourselves if you think the kingdom of God can come through violence. It doesn't come through violence. It comes through sacrificial love for the sake of the other. Scott McKnight wrote a great commentary on the book of James, and he said that those who follow Jesus' interpretation of the Torah, care for the poor, and know that God's plan is to establish justice, such people, he says, do not respond in violence, but pursue God's justice in humility. Now, what's also interesting about that, Vinny, here is this, we are a violent culture, and we just don't think we are. Not because our violence isn't manifest in the same way. We incarcerate several million people in our country. We have far more prisoners in our country per capita than any country in the world. That includes Russia and China. That's violence against the people. And we can go on for a long time with this. We impose weapons and militarization. We are waging war as a nation against countries all over the world. We've been waging war against Iran for years. We call them sanctions. Sanctions are economic warfare. And the idea of that is to cripple the economy so that the people suffer enough so that they will try to topple the regime themselves. We're waging war not against the regime explicitly, but against the people. The mass of people, we're starving them. We've been doing this to Cuba for years, for decades. And so you think about the violence of our society. It's a violent society. We begin sporting events, leave your politics out of sports. Like, we start our sporting events with a singing of the national anthem, and then we have a flyover of the military. And then we all stand, because we honor the soldiers. And I'm not against honoring I'm simply saying this is a society that's militarized. And that militarization, which happened especially during the Bush era in 2001 and following, it's a violent society. We just use legal means to do it. And the answer is no. It's by the way, they didn't have prisons for incarcerating people for the way we do as well. It's a different society. You take this in your own hands. But again, the key point would be to understand how honor and shame are involved here, because it's expected that you speak to people this way, and expected that you respond and defend your honor.
Yeah. Well, and even just as a complete sidebar, but why is it that I think the stat is Canadians per capita have more guns than Americans, but why is it that gun violence is significantly higher in America than it is Canada? I mean, that's the thing. Canada's not Australia. It's not like there's an absence of guns. There's a ton of guns, but how come you're not seeing mass shootings and just the violence that you see? There's something happening in our culture, and it's just kind of come to be expected. A Columbine today is kind of going to be, if we were to see that type of event, it's, oh yeah, that happened today. That sucks. Let's move on. Whereas when that first happened in 1999, that wrecked the country for weeks because it was so unique. And now it's just, oh yeah, how many are we going to have this year? There's
and we can go on for a long time. It's essential to the biblical story. This is what the book that Ian and I are working on, and some of the videos that I've been making in the fall. to understand that God creates the world not by using violence. We can discuss that. If you understand Genesis in its ancient Near Eastern context, all the ancient context of stories were that God, the gods, or the supreme God, creates the world through violence. He slays the dragon. In the biblical story, the dragon, that's in the sea, and it was good. It's not an enemy of God, and God creates through speaking. And then Jesus comes along and says, put away your swords. All who live by the sword will die by the sword. So we go to the book of James, but you can't go to the New Testament and find that violence.
Yeah.
So you might have a violent God in the Old Testament, and that's another dispute, but you can't find that violence in the New Testament except the violence of the empire that's done to Jesus. Or done to the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. It's not what we do. It's like, I can go on for a long time because this is a pet peeve of mine. It's just really, it's fundamentally undermining the gospel story when we realize, when we think that violence is justifiable. It's, and again, we're not talking about self-defense. Just to be clear, a woman who's being abused, people are, that's biblical. That's not what we're speaking of.
Yeah. So the speech is obviously a huge theme throughout the book.
Yeah.
The dichotomy of rich and poor is also a huge theme.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes up like most of, or if not all of chapter 2, some of the end of chapter 1. And I don't know. I've never thought of it in terms of he's not making a value judgment on if it's bad to be rich. What it seems to be is, how are you treating those who are not? Which is, I mean, the majority of people are not going to be rich. So that's another thing. If the majority of the ancient world is going to be poor, and this isn't the Roman world. This is, he's probably writing to a church in Jerusalem. So
it's still the Roman world, though.
It's still the Roman world. Yeah. So my first question would be, do you still have the same proportional discrepancies of 90% poor, extreme poor, and then just the top 3% rich? Would you still have that?
You still have that, and remember, it's written to the 12 tribes in dispersion, so it's not just to the Jewish community. It's to the tribes in dispersion, and you still have that. In fact, that's Jesus's whole point when he comes in. This is part of the book that we're writing as well, and that is, you guys are not doing the Jubilee economy that I called you to do. Among God's people, you're supposed to do this for the poor. You're supposed to do this for the you allow them to glean in your fields. And the story of the rich young ruler that we may have discussed before, and I'll do in the future, which is in the book as well, is like, you obtained this land by stealing from the people, and you didn't give it back as the Jubilee law requires, or forgiving your debts as the Jubilee law requires, like give without expecting anything in return. All of Jesus's words were, you have failed to do these things. And hence the judgment that's coming for those who fail to accept Christ now. And obviously for those who accept Jesus and John the Baptist, it's the Jubilee's at hand. And this is the whole idea of this economy of God's people is at hand. So it's intriguing because when you read the scriptures clear, let's go. I'm going to stop on that because I can go for a long time on that. Let's go to the book of James and look at this. Here we go. And I think I have it kind of highlighted. It should be easy to follow. So what James is pointing out now is the irony of, okay, you guys are doing these things, but when you're doing these things, you're lashing out at one another, and you're lashing out at the poor, and you're showing favoritism to the wealthy, but it's the wealthy who are oppressing you. What are you doing? Because again, if I get shamed, then I have to show that I have more honor than you. So I might lash out at you to put you down even further. All right. So look at all these references here to the poor and the rich in the book of James. So chapter 1, verse 9, the brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position. And note the contrast, by the way. And humble circumstances actually is to glory in his high position. Okay. The rich man in his glory is in his humiliation. Okay. Now we'll continue on. Orphans and widows, of course, true religion. This is one of the great verses in James. Anyone thinks himself religious in verse 26. It doesn't bridle his tongue. We talked about that. But deceives his own heart. This man's religion is worthless. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God our Father, or of our God and Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. There you go. Now, chapter 2, we may have discussed this already a little bit. A man comes into your assembly with a gold ring, verse 2 of chapter 2, and dressed in fine linen, and there's a poor man. All right, you pay special attention to the one who's wearing the fine clothes, verse 3, and say, sit here in a good place, but to the poor you say, stand over there. Verse 5, did not God choose the poor? of this world. You've dishonored the poor man. Is not the rich who oppress you in verse 6? They drag you into court, and the word for drag here implies some kind of violence. The rich are dragging you into court. And by the way, if the rich drag you into court, you're going to lose because they're rich and you're not. That's just the way the court system works. Do they blaspheme the fair name by which you've been called? If you're following the royal law, which we discussed last week, you should love your neighbor as yourself. But you're showing partiality. So and then it goes on, of course. A brother or sister is without clothing and need of daily food. It goes on there as well. Then chapter 4 and 5 has some more. Chapter 5, the pay of the laborers. Oh, woe to you who are rich. Now he addresses the rich. Woe to you who are rich, chapter 5, verse 1. And then verse 4, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields. So it's the rich's fields. You withheld their pay. Well, they cry out against you. And by the way, when the poor cry out, God always answers. That's kind of the theme of the Old Testament story. The Israelites cried unto God. In Exodus chapter 1 and 2, you might know the story, Vinny, that in the first 2 chapters of Exodus, God does not appear at all. There's no discussion of God at all. And in the last couple of verses, I think the last 3 verses, of course, it says, the Israelites cried unto God, and God heard their cry. That's how chapter 2 ends. So the cry of those, their outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabbath. Like, God's about to answer. So therefore, be patient, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer, that's the poor. So you see this continuous contrast between the rich and the poor throughout the book of James. And it's the rich who are causing your trouble and bringing about your abuse. And it's the poor whom you're shaming. That's just to gain yourself more honor, at least I wouldn't say more honor, but less shame among them. So yeah, it's this interesting thing about how we in the West can have so much wealth. And so we have to always buttress these conversations with like, well, it's not saying you can't be rich. And I'm not pointing my finger at you at all. We have to do that, Vinny. But I think I'm personally thinking we need to figure out a better way of doing it. And by the way, you and I are both by modern standards wealthy.
Sure.
I think we need to figure out, the scriptures are pretty clear. Woe to you who are rich. Blessed are you who are poor, you who hunger now. Mm-hmm. And I think there's 2 parts to that, which we're addressing in our book a little bit. One is how we acquired our wealth. Oh, I worked hard. Okay, whatever. We'll discuss that another time. And what we are doing with our wealth. Those are the 2 things that we have to address. So, yep.
Would you say for you that that's been an ongoing process of discovery? Like, have you reached an arrival point? A lot of times scholars, they've kind of worked it out and then they put it out into the public square to discuss that, but you're still in process on that?
I think it's going to be a lifelong process. I don't know what to do. I don't know. I've been saying this for a few years in different studies and different situations. Yeah. How do I reconcile with what the scriptures clearly say? And sure, I've gotten wealthy, but others people didn't have the same opportunities that I had. Mm-hmm. And even more so, that's just an issue. Okay. I've been in ministry all my life, so that's kind of tamp down a little bit of how I can accumulate wealth, but I've been able to own a home. That's the bottom line. We got some money. My wife and I first got married, and Tony's extremely brilliant when it comes to these things. So we were able to own a home. That's the number one way to gain wealth for the average person in America, and that's just not available to everybody. We think it is, and people go, "Oh yes," it's like, no, it's not. Just look at the history of America and racism and racial discrimination when it comes to housing, and economics when it comes to housing, and then. More significantly, what am I doing with it? What am I doing with the wealth? Yeah, we've been through a lot. We've made a lot of changes, what we do and what we don't do, and things like that as well.
Okay.
Yep. Are you still? Have you thought about it? Just if I put the question back at you. Yeah.
It truly is one of those. First, I think for me, it's still trying to say, okay, what do the scriptures say on it, and how can I better understand what it's saying? And I think part of mine is still like the nucleus of it, saying, is it a condemnation of wealth? Is it saying like the good guys are the poor ones, the bad guys are the rich ones? To simplify, yeah. Are the rich the villains of the story, or is it? Because even like the Jubilee story, it recognizes there will people who have more than less. But what happens, that's not just the way it is. I mean, how often have we heard the phrase, Like Jesus said, the poor will always be among you. Like
I was just going to quote that verse.
Yes, yeah, and I don't know how many times that's been floated out there as like, yeah, Jesus just makes it sound like that. That's just what's going to happen. But if you look at the context of that, what is that? Yeah. Mark 14.
We're going to look at the context since we're on this topic.
Yeah, and even there, if you look at that context, because Mark 14, right?
It's Deuteronomy 15. I'm looking at though. He's quoting Deuteronomy.
Okay. But even there, it's like the point is like you have time to be able to go and minister to all these people. They're always going to be there. And therefore you always have the opportunity to minister to them and to help them. The thing that just happened where this woman anointed me with this, the pure nard or whatever it was, that's a once in a lifetime opportunity you have that she took that. You're always going to have opportunities. So it's not that like, they're always going to be amongst you. So you just got to deal with it. Yeah. They're always going to be there, unfortunately. And you have the opportunity to minister to them, and it's your duty to minister to them.
All right. I'm going to go one step further. Okay. Jesus is rebuking them because there are not supposed to be any poor among them. Look at Deuteronomy 15. Every 7 years, the sabbatic year, you shall forgive their debts. Okay. From the foreigner, you can exact it, right? Interest, but you shall not from your brother. However, there will be no poor among you. Okay. Now, verse 13, I'm sorry, what verse? Okay, there it is, verse 11. The poor will never cease to be in the land. In other words, verse 11 is saying, you're not going to do this. The context of Deuteronomy 15 and of the Jubilee and of the covenant economics is to make sure that the poor are always provided for. And here's how we're going to do that. You're not going to charge interest. And if they do fall into debt and they borrow from that 7 years later, you have to forgive their debt. You can't let this compound. And if they have to sell their land, it goes back to the family. So every 2 or 3 generations, the family has some means of providing their own sustenance for them. You have all these provisions of the law. The point of it is so that there will be no poor among you. The fact that, so Jesus is quoting this verse, and you're familiar, Vinny, with biblical interpretation, biblical hermeneutics, and that is one of the key principles in Jewish hermeneutics and Jewish interpretation, is that when they quote one verse, they often almost always have the larger context in mind.
Sure.
And so the larger context is, well, there should be no poor among you. I'm quoting this verse. You're never going to cease to have the poor in the land. That's why they're kicked out of the land. They're sent into exile because of this, this is one of many reasons, because they didn't do this. They didn't make sure that they forgave. I can go on for a long time on this. I'm sorry. But, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to do it this way. The biblical provision is that they're not supposed to have any poor, and you do. And that's the problem. It's not that, well, you're always going to have the opportunity to care for them. No, you're supposed to make sure that there aren't any. That's what, actually, I'm going to go one more place here since we're on this, because this is just kind of reinforce the same point here. Let me go here. In the book of Acts, I always forget if it's chapter 2 or chapter 4 here, because it's the same kind of content. I think it's chapter 4. Let's see. Yeah, chapter 4. Okay, I'll just scroll up this way. And chapter 4, remember this, they're selling their land and providing for one another. And of course, Ananias and Sapphira don't. Look what it says in verse 34. There was not a needy person among them. That the Greek of Acts 4:34 is very similar to the Greek of Deuteronomy 15. The early church was doing what they needed, and they didn't sell all their possessions. So you're right. Some were wealthier than others. Some had more, I won't say wealthier, some had more than others. Totally biblical. They didn't sell all their land. Chapter 5 is all about the fact that you didn't have to give any of the money to the church. You could have kept some of it. Why'd you cover it up? Right? Ananias and Sapphira dropped dead. And the point of that, though, is that they were selling their land so that there would be no poor among them. They were doing exactly what the covenant requires of God's covenant people. And now we apply that to today. And I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and say it, Vinny. That's fine. This is kind of related to the next conversation, which we can discuss here. We rationalize, it's human nature. We rationalize, we reason, and justify our situation because we're not bad people. We know we're good people. So we justify our wealth, and then we obviously demonize the other. So that's why you're poor, because you are lazy, because you did these. Granted, that sometimes is true. And sometimes people that are wealthy have worked really, really hard. Okay, that's great. But we do these things. And so we have to reckon with these verses and we rationalize this and we go, okay, what do we do with this? I don't think that the church is obedient. I'll say the church, larger C, is obedient well enough to the biblical command to care for the least of these brothers of mine, the poor. When did I see you naked? When did I see you hungry? When did I see you thirsty? That's the essence of the biblical story. And this is what the book that Ian and I are working on right now, trying to lay out that this is what it looks like to be God's covenant people. And then the second thing is, which I almost forgot my train of, is I don't see how this is going to come out. I might have to clarify this, and feel free to ask me questions so I can clarify this. You can preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, love your enemies, lay down your life for the sake of your neighbor, consider others better than yourselves, give without expecting anything in return. If your right eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. You start taking the ethic and the commands of Jesus. Blessed are the poor. What are you who are rich? I don't see how you can get a mega church out of that. I just don't see it. I don't see how. The only way I think you can get a mega church is you have to compromise the gospel. You have to hide something on the gospel. It's for your good. You're going to get to go to heaven. We're going to help your family get better. I'm not saying those are bad things. I'm simply saying you can say those things, but you're appealing to self. Why you need to come to this church, why it's for your good, which the whole essence of the gospel is deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. I get it. There's a sense of self. It's there. The book of Revelation holds this great hope out for us, right? I've got the keys to death and Hades. Look, guys, I've overcome this. And if you overcome, you're going to eat from the tree of life. So there is a hanging the carrot out there. I get that. But the essence of the gospel is self-denial. And so the only way we can have a mega church, I think, and I've been processing this, as you know, for 10 years or more at least, is we just can't have a prophetic voice in the church. We can't preach Jesus well enough. We can't say, hey guys, I get it. We got to have strong borders. Every nation has a right to have strong. I get it. That's important. It's essential. We got to have a proper system, but we also have to have an asylum process because people are fleeing death and danger and horrific circumstances, some of which we caused in their country. Because of our sanctions, because of our economics, or because of our gun companies. By the way, guns last forever, right? That guns don't. You hand your gun down to your son and your grandson. Right. So we're not selling a whole lot of guns in America. So how are our gun companies staying in business? They're selling them to South America and Central America. Why is there so much? Because we're financing it and funding it, and and the NAFTA and the trade. What we did to the farmers, and then. So the idea becomes, wait a minute, we as God's people go, hey, stop. That's creating economic ruin in that country. Hey, stop. That's creating injustice and tragedy in that. I get that we have to defend our, okay, great. But what are we doing? And then we're not giving them a process for asylum? I mean, asylum? Or we're revoking temporary protected status for Haitians because it's not safe. If we knew of America's involvement in Haiti, we would go, oh, we got to do something. It's not just America; it's the West, and the church has got to go.
You know that we're revoking the Haitians because they eat the dogs and the cats.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what empire does, by the way, right? And we do this. We demonize the other. I'm good. You're so. The reason why that person's poor is because the reason why I'm not poor is because it's human nature to do this. And Jesus says, as we discussed last week, love your enemies. We can't make them the other. Not all Muslims are radical extremists. Not all Palestinians are terrorists. Not all Israelis support Ben Gvir and the genocide. Of course, large Poles in Israel are supporting the genocide, but that's because the propaganda of the empire doesn't tell them anything else. The way the empire, if you know, where most Israelis support the genocide on Gaza. And the answer is because Israel has an absolute total control of what they're being told and what they're not being told. They're not getting any information on what's happening in Gaza. They don't know anything about Gaza, right? Israel has not let any foreign correspondents into Gaza. The only sources in Gaza from what's happening there are from Gazans. That's not being reported in Israel. So of course you're going to control populations and peoples and opinions when you restrict the media, when you restrict the information, which we're going to do this series on AI. That's the major danger I'm concerned about with AI. It's going to control the information. And when they make false videos and fake videos, we have no way of knowing it's fake because AI is getting so good. We can't figure out AI from not AI now. It's going to only get better. This is the danger when the empire controls things. So going back to the church, and I'm on a prophetic, sorry, Vinny, but the danger is when we demonize the other as well and make them other. And when you make them others, well, Yoav Galant, they're all human animals. There are no innocents in Gaza. When you say these things, it just justifies slaughtering them. Right? Iran, they're all radical extremists. No, they're not. I'm going to meet with Iranian pastors in November.
Oh, wow.
The fastest growing church, at least a few years ago, in the world was the Iranian church. Right? Danny and I don't think you were on. Danny and I did a live stream with an Iranian Christian. And yeah, there's a lot of persecution in Iran. I get it. The point is, we need to critique every empire. We need to critique every, including ourselves. And the problem I was going to mention before, when I say these things, like, oh, you must be a Democrat, you must be a socialist. It's like, folks, they're all problematic. The only biblical economy is Jesus's economy. And Jesus' economy doesn't work on any empire because those in power will never let it happen. That's where we call up and be the prophetic voice for the people. And no form of government, the only form of government that would work, biblically speaking, is a benevolent dictator. And his name is Jesus. And that's not Christian nationalism. That's not a theocracy, because a theocracy is still humans. It's not. So what do? We critique empire and we say, hey, good job there. Hey, bad job there. And when we critique Trump, we say, good job there and bad job there. But when I say bad job there, oh, you must be in favor of Biden. No, I've said this, I've critiqued Trump at times, and people go, where were you 4 years ago? I had to somebody actually said that to me. I'm like, saying that Biden belongs in prison because he's a warmonger and he's paying for a genocide. I said, Biden, Harris, and Blinken all belong in prison. So does Trump. So does Obama. So does Bush. So does Clinton. I mean, I don't know. I can name a president in the last 50 years that doesn't belong in prison because they're warmongers and because they financed wars and murders. So I digress.
Here's
Apparently, we're not going to finish James.
I was just going to say, we're not going to finish James in 2, so we need to come back for a third one.
That's good. Yeah.
So that'll be next week. We'll finish up James.
I hope that was a good conversation, though.
It was, and hopefully we're making folks uncomfortable. And I think what's helpful about this conversation is it's not, speaking of honor and shame, we're not shaming folks into giving away their stuff or whatever. It's just more of, hey, there's a challenge here and we're wading through this. And just as we're processing this, we hope that you're all processing this as well. If you ever read the scriptures and just feel as comfortable leaving as when you did entering it, you probably didn't do much study. You did it, for confirmation bias. And it's this stuff ought to make us uncomfortable.
Vinny, I've said this in pastors' meetings before, where I was not the senior pastor. And let me just say, it didn't go over well. Okay. I'm in a room with 12 or more pastors. And I said, I'm sorry, but there are Sundays where I come to church and I should not leave feeling comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We need to make sure that I said, if I shouldn't be made comfortable then they shouldn't be made comfortable every week. That did not go over well. And I said it just like that. I also said to my own congregation when I was preaching, I said, listen, if you get the message from me, because in my church, we would do a doxology at the end of the service, and in the middle of the doxology, I'd kind of walk out to the back door. So you had to walk by me. You could kind of go out the other door, but you had to walk by me and shake my hand and say, "Good job, Pastor," because of course I did a good job. No, because that's what you have to say. You've preached at the church. You've been there, and I said, if you hear this sermon from a sermon from me at all, and you take away from that sermon and think I have to just try harder, I said, don't shake my hand, slap me.
Oh, wow.
I don't want to overburden you with we have to try harder. It's rely more upon the Spirit of God. That's the whole idea of living this out. And we'll get into this next week because we're going to do faith without works is dead in James 2. Mm-hmm. And the whole James and Paul and Luther and whatever issue. It's not saying try harder. It's just be transformed by the Spirit of God so that we become Jesus-like people and live Jesus-like more Jesus-like lives. That's what we're saying. And I think that's what we're wrestling with. I don't see this in the church. And I say that universally, and that, of course, is my niche of the church, the Western evangelical church, the mega church scene largely, and things like that as well. And it's like, yeah, but it's not try harder. It's love more. It's rely on the Spirit more. But yeah, it very much is. We should not feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And
it's funny because even the comment about how, wanting to make people uncomfortable and wanting to be challenged, I've been in enough churches over the years to know we want that in some areas. We want to be challenged when it comes to sexual ethics. We want to be challenged when we're challenging the world on those sorts of things. But there's other things that are off limits. It's like, don't challenge us on these things.
Yeah, my truck out in the parking lot, that's not a no-go. I've worked a long time to get that.
Yep.
Right? My vacation, come on, I deserve that.
Yeah. Don't challenge me on the American dream or
exactly.
and the fruit of that. Yeah.
I earned it. Yeah.
So,
and everyone can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps unless they don't have any boots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll leave it there, and we'll leave the uncomfortableness. So that's good. So come back next week as we'll continue in James, which is amazing because you're going to be in Jerusalem. So you could go and hang out. You could take your DeLorean and go back to the future and sit in the Jerusalem Council and observe that.
My DeLorean?
From Back to the Future.
Oh, the time travel.
Oh my God.
Oh, because I'm going to go back to Jerusalem Council. Oh, okay, cool. I get it now.
The best kind of comments are the ones that you have to explain.
I'm ADD, so I wasn't listening, and so
I'm ADD. But what?
Exactly. So I didn't hear the go back to the Jerusalem Council part. I'm like, DeLorean, what does that have to do with anything? And then that distracted me enough. And then as I was talking, I'm like, oh, he said go back to the Jerusalem Council. That's how I got it. I'm like, oh, so I heard enough to cover myself there and not look like too much of a fool.
Nice. Awesome. All right, my friends, we will see you guys next week. Please, here's what I'd like to see. Make a comment below. When was the last time you left church and you were challenged, and the challenge wasn't merely a modern sexual ethic issue? When was the last time was you were actually challenged on an issue regarding finances, and it wasn't because you're not tithing enough? Something outside the normal evangelical.
Well, the tithing enough, like on the once a year thing. But how about like an off series sermon that was like, some churches have the give campaign.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll guilt you then. But how about just on a regular sermon, just because money's everywhere. That should be coming up on a regular basis here, the rich and the poor. Yeah, things like that. Or immigration or race or gender issues or war, violence, nonviolence, spousal abuse, husbands, the way you treat your wives. We can go on for a while. None of which applies to us. I've heard other people in the churches have these issues. Yeah,
exactly.
I had to take notes because I'm like, this is not. I don't know what you're talking about.
It's new to me.
Shut up! I'm trying to finish a podcast in here.
Gosh. Nice. All right, everyone. We will catch you guys next week. See you then.
Thanks for joining us today. If you dug it, please subscribe and share it with others. Check us out at determinedtruth.com to see more of what we do and maybe even consider supporting us. See you next time.
Faith is an ocean you can walk on.